and talking leadership with people connected to the Queensland Rugby Union in many different ways, from board members, commercial partners and donors, to former players, coaches and people connected with the community game. The series is brought to you by our official luxury hotel partner, Amora Brisbane. It's been a privilege to work with Rob, Nikki, Tessa and the Amora team this year, and we're so excited to continue working with them as presenting partner of leaders within Queensland Rugby and the Amora Centreline Lounge on Queensland Red's Super Rugby game days in 2025. If you haven't checked out the beautifully refurbished Amora Brisbane, you need to. Whether you're travelling from overseas, interstate, within Queensland, or you're just wanting a staycation for that special occasion, Amora Brisbane is perfectly placed in the heart of the CBD. We've been thinking about the concept of leaders within Queensland Rugby for a long time, and to be able to bring it to life with 12 outstanding guests across 11 episodes was really enjoyable. For this episode of Leaders Within Queensland Rugby, it was really interesting to take a different approach and to sit down with two guests, husband and wife, Steve and Jane Wilson. It was really clear to see how they complement one each other in all facets of their life and how it's helped them to be successful in many different ways. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Steve and Jane Wilson. Jane, Steve Wilson, welcome to Leaders Within Queensland Rugby, our first double act. If you could tell us first initially, Jane, your connection to the game.
To rugby, yes, it seems to have been there forever in my background, but not as intensely, I guess. As a young girl playing with my brothers, tossing a football around, I was better at that than cricket. Had friends who ended up becoming Wallaby players, children who played rugby, daughter who played touch, and through one way or other I ended up on the Rugby Australia Board, so now very involved in rugby.
A big job. Steve, yourself?
Well, I was a real sports fan. I was actually a rugby league fan, not a rugby union fan, but then when I went to school I played rugby and preferred cricket, but I was better at rugby, and so I had commenced a playing career through school, and then off at university I played for the club there. I did actually play a season of league as well, so I've done a bit of both. And then after that I've got involved in the administration side on and off for 40 odd years.
Purpose of today is to talk about leadership more than rugby. So let's start with that initially. Jane, you mentioned serving on the Rugby Australia Board. I understand you've served on dozens of boards over your career. Leadership's a core tenet of that type of responsibility. What does being a leader mean to you?
It's a tricky one. I think people often ask this, and there's different ways of approaching it, but leaders are not, it's different to managing. And I think in leadership you've got to have the courage to actually stand by your decisions and have the courage to make decisions and execute them, and then live with the results of those decisions. That's real leadership.
I've also read that some of the board roles that you've served in, have been in areas which you wouldn't necessarily consider yourself an expert in. How has that impacted your ability to be a leader in those types of organisations, and what do you need to do to be able to continue to lead while you're learning at the same time?
Yes, it's an interesting question, because you've got to understand too that in yourself that your leaders don't know everything, and you need to know where to draw on information, draw on expertise, draw on others' opinions, but at the end of the day you still have to make a decision about that. You just can't be across everything, especially in areas of different corporations. You just can't be across every bit of subject matter that you're looking at. So it's about distilling the information and making the best decision you can possible, but with a group of people. So I see boards, for example, as the ultimate team. You are working with a group of people who will also put their shoulder to the grindstone together, like you do on the field of play, but then you make a decision together.
Steve, how about yourself? Is leadership something that comes naturally to you, that you've always gravitated towards?
Yes and no. The no part is that early on when I was younger I probably more wanted to be one of the gang and not stand out too much. But also always I had this desire to succeed in organisations that I'm involved with, which in the early days means a sporting team. And I automatically assumed that everybody wants the same outcome that a sporting team does, which is to win all the time. And one of the things I've learned is that not everybody is motivated to the same level to that kind of light on a hill, if you like. So I've learnt through sports, and particularly team sports, particularly rugby, but it's not the only one that you learn this, that you can't assume that everybody has that same burning ambition to get something done. So one thing though, you can't get things done unless you're conscious of the team and knowing that in the team different people have different motivations.
What I'm hearing is that you may have a fundamental leadership style, but you're also able to alter that and adjust that, to lead different individuals in different ways. Is that fair?
Yeah, very much so, very much so. Look, early on, when I became a leader, say in business, that was where I had that assumption that we're all just trying to climb this tall mountain and win every victory. And that's when I started to realise that different people very much have different motivations, different levels of commitment, but also respond differently to different ways they're treated.
Is that difficult for you to almost come to terms with that and understanding those different motivations when they don't necessarily align with your own?
Look, it was initially, but then you learn pretty quickly that you can't just sort of have the same kind of spirit speech. And I mean, spirit speech is a bit of a sort of rugby thing, isn't it, or a team thing, but it's kind of the same in business. You think, right, come on, we're going to do all of these things. But yes, it takes a bit of learning, but it happens quickly, because if you just assume that everybody's as driven as you are, or as driven as some of the people are, it won't work. So you either learn on the job or you'll bomb out.
Are there any moments that spring to mind of times when you've made the wrong choice as a leader, or important lessons that you've had to learn along the journey?
Definitely. I mean, they're pointed out to you all the time, especially on things like rugby, like all the things you got wrong. Love all the grandstand people who love to tell you what you got wrong. So yes, you get it wrong a lot, but you want to get it right more than wrong. But you've got to again own the wrong decisions, yes, and examine it. Why did we get it wrong? And it's easy to look backwards and say, well, we got it wrong because of these things, but we didn't know that at the time. So you've got to make the best decisions at the time with the best information possible and go about it, own it, then reflect when you don't get it right and say, why? Can I do better next time? So yes, absolutely. No one gets it right all the time.
Right in the heart of the Brisbane CBD, Amora Hotel is perfectly placed whether your stay is for business or for leisure. Thanks to the Amora Hotel Brisbane team for their support of leaders within Queensland Rugby and the QRU more broadly. Make it Amora and love the difference.
So ultimately, the price of leadership is that you pay the price for making a wrong decision. You have to own that decision. So you can't say, oh, well, someone down the line didn't do well. You certainly will reflect on that and make sure that if management are executing things incorrectly or whatever, you still carry the decision-making role as a leader. So externally, you have to own that wrong decision or things when they didn't go right, but then you ultimately work backwards and try and work out how it happened and what can be done better. And you have your internal seances, but you have to own it still as a leader. That's your job.
Steve, how do you go empowering others and leading others and inspiring them to make decisions, and how hands-on do you like to get?
I think one of the main things is to try and get agreement about what the goal is. And that means having a decent conversation about what's achievable, what's a light on the hill, but what's an achievable light on the hill. So I used to say, look, there's no point trying to become the heavyweight champion of the world if you're a lightweight, to use that sporting analogy. But equally, there's no point in only trying to be incrementally better. I find the sorts of people who I've had the privilege to work with, but also I've sought out these sorts of people to work with them, either initially as my bosses or later when I became a leader, was people who really want to achieve great things. So certainly one of the things I try and do is have people on the bus who have an ambition to take that bus to a good place, which doesn't mean that everybody is as driven as perhaps everybody else, but it means that people agree, look, this bus is heading to that place, if I can use that parallel, and we agree that that's where we're trying to get to. So you start with clarity about what you're trying to achieve. You achieve that not by instructing people, but by agreeing what it is, by encouraging people to aim high, having the sorts of people who want to aim high, but then setting in place measurements to see how you're going against it. So you don't say, we're going to be the greatest this or that and it's all going to happen. You've got to have steps along the way. So in that sense, you get back to measurement systems. So you have road measurements as you go along that road, and you say, look, at this point, to reach that big goal, we need to have got to this stage. So it's about honesty, it's about buy-in, and then it's about transparency of how you're going. And in terms of mistakes, your earlier question about mistakes is that everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has failures. And one of the good things about sport is that on the weekend you win or you lose, and no one wins all the time. So you learn more in life from failure than success. You don't learn if you don't examine and accept that failure and say, we went wrong for a reason. So I found that sporting parallel is very useful through across to the broader world of business or society, whatever. So it's that honesty, it's appraisal of where you went wrong, being prepared to be honest about it, each to the other, peer to peer. I think those are the things that allow for success.
You spoke about some of the leaders that you've sought out over your journey. Are there particular mentors who come to mind, or could you shed a light perhaps on what it was that you're able to take from those types of people specifically?
Well, in sport, I was privileged that our club coach and the Queensland coach at the time was Bob Templeton, who was also the Wallaby coach. So it's incredibly exciting to be coached by someone of that stature, and not just stature. He didn't get there. He was a leader who got there not from fear but from persuasion, and people liked him. So that was handy. I mean, you can have people who get there via fear, and they can be good leaders too. But it's not. One of my lessons was that that's not as good as getting there by being respected. In business, I always tried to go to places that were led by the best people. So in my career in the investment world, I went to London, and that's because it was the centre of international finance, and still really is the centre of international finance. And I had some wonderful bosses there, a firm called Cazenove, who were the preeminent firm that's now part of the JP Morgan Group. There were many people there. And then when I came back to Australia, I had the privilege to work for a very short period of time for some of the best in the field, one of whom was my father, but tragically he died a year after I got back, so I only ever got to work with him for a year. But
Steve, just on that, what was it about your father's leadership style that overly resonated?
Well, I think father's always different in the sense that their leadership style is they're your father, so there's no questioning sort of is he the boss cocky kind of thing, or at least not in my family anyway. It started as a young fella. I look up, I think most youngsters, they look up to their dad. So he started with that advantage. But a couple of things that I remember about him purely in a work sense that wasn't just because he was my dad. He showed a lot of courage, and he showed great intellectual grunt. And that courage was in being ready to stand up and ask a difficult question of an investment meeting, for example. He'd ask a CEO, well, tell us why you think that you're heading this company in the right direction. He might ask an uncomfortable question. And I learned from that to have the courage to have done your work and know what you're talking about, and then ask people or challenge people about what they're trying to achieve.
Jane, yourself, are there people that have shaped your growth as a leader over your journey?
It's another thing that makes you really ponder, doesn't it? What makes you go into what you do? I guess my grandfather was a strong influence in my life. He was a corporate lawyer, but he served on many community boards, president of the RNA and chairman of the Queensland Turf Club and many other community organisations. So he and I used to stay with my grandparents when I was studying for my finals in med school. So I used to see a lot of what they did and how much that involved and how time-consuming it was, but also admired the way he got on with any people from any walks of life. I know when I was doing medicine, John Heron stood out for me as a great leader. He became a politician, but he was also a great leader in the hospitals as a surgeon, tremendous teacher, and I admired the fact that he could combine medicine and healthcare policy and politics. He did a fantastic job there. David Crombie comes to mind when I was asked to chair the inaugural Horticulture Australia Board, which is an industry association. He was the chair of the Meat and Livestock Association at the time, and I took David's great advice on that. I said, David, should I do this job? And, what is it like? And he was a tremendous mentor in those early days too, as to how to deal with disparate organisations. We had 43 different industry groups that we had to pull together in the horticulture industry. So it was an interesting one. So yeah, they're the types of people that very fortunate to have really terrific mentors that can go to and ask for advice and help and admire what they did in their roles.
Unifying different associations like that, I mean, that's a skill that I dare say comes in handy in your role with Rugby Australia and
Yes.
a nation, passionate rugby people, but with differing landscapes and priorities. Is there anything specific you can share that David Crombie shared with you that you took on board in that role?
He's a very wise man, but he did say, you can't please everybody. You just won't please everybody. No matter what you do, there'll always be grumble from sides because, again, you have to choose a path and not everyone will be pleased with those decisions. But again, accountability and openness and honesty and really willing to have those discussions. So making people feel included, that they're actually heard, I think was one of the biggest things that, we both discussed and led to changing of the way the organisation did things and to take into account. So we had open forums, a little bit like what we're doing in rugby now. So I was very vocal in trying to make sure that we had open, we had our first rugby summit not so long ago, and I said, this is crazy. We should all be in the same room talking together about all the stakeholders that we can get together in the same room so that we can, a bit like Steve said, you've got to be knowing where you're all going together. And I think the horticulture experience and the industry association experience helped a lot with that. Just got to hear everybody, but be in the same room.
5 adult children, 3 and 3/4 grandkids. You're both very, very busy and show no signs of slowing down. How do you manage all the different things that are in your life and make sure that you look after your health as well?
Well, I'm very good at outsourcing. So as far as the family and children are concerned, I played that sort of slightly more, old-fashioned male role and handed over to Jane, which is not to say I don't know what's going on with the kids, but the heavy lifting she does, and I totally acknowledge that. It works for us.
How about for you, Jane?
Oh, yeah, a great way of getting work-life balance is to have a wife. But I think Steve's modest in saying he's always been a great father too, very present. So you can outsource some of those things, but you still got to be very present in a family life. It doesn't matter whether you're father, mother, whoever you are. It's being present and there. So that's family life is time consuming, but it's fun. And we both chose to have 5 kids knowing that it would be very time consuming, but we enjoy it. That's one of our passions, I guess.
I mean, look, I was joking to a degree. I mean,
not really.
Outsourcing suggests you give it to someone else and say you do it. Perhaps the better way to describe it is delegating, but making sure things are going along nicely and we work together well as a team on the kids. On the broader issue of life balance, I've just always found that exercise and sport and other interests beyond your business or beyond your sport, if that's your business, help enormously. So I'm just a huge believer in doing that. I still row with a bunch of old guys and, we get up a lot of sweat, and for our age we're okay, but it's more about being with a bunch of people who share a common goal, and in this case, in the case of rowing, they're from a very wide range of backgrounds, so it's just a bunch of guys having a lot of fun and doing a lot of sweating.
Do you set boundaries? Are there things that you do to ensure you avoid a conflict of not being able to be present, for example, for your children or for your pursuits outside of formal obligations?
Set boundaries in the sense that if there's something important to be there for with family, so yes, making the family is the number one rock for me. So looking after ourselves, us as a couple and our children as a family, absolutely priority number one, and then everything else comes after that. That's and I'm with people in organisations too. I'm always careful to make sure that if someone who's a CEO, for example, or someone else, there's an issue, that they also prioritise that in their lives so that they're see so many CEOs who have relationship breakdowns because they dedicate so much of their time to the organisation and don't look after those relationships as well. So, yeah, I think it's important to get, that's my balance, and then you just work around that.
Jane Wilson, Steve Wilson, thank you so much for spending time on Leaders Within Queensland Rugby.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank
Been
you.
a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Leaders Within Queensland Rugby, proudly presented by Amora Hotel Brisbane. Head to Apple Podcasts and Spotify to subscribe and get a new episode every week. Or if you can't wait that long, head to the Queensland Reds YouTube page to see all the episodes in one place.